When we talk about change orders, the whole change order process is handled from a single screen. And so when we look at how a change order is done in here, just pull one up. I indicate the job, put in the description, put in the change number and the reason. The dates will auto-populate, by the way, just based on the status of the change order. Also, we've got our delay request here and the status. Now, the status is important because this was going to control when in fact it impacts your budget and your contract. Open, review, and dispute is change request, and approved is a change order. Likewise, down here, the prime is what the customer, this is what we're communicating to our customer. This is how this change order impacts our budget and our subcontractors. Now, one of the other questions I just got is, can I split a change order up to multiple subcontracts? And the answer is yes. I have an example of that, actually. Yeah, so in this particular example, I've got a single change order impacting 3 different subs, 3 different amounts. Their statuses are individually controlled, so we can do that too. And by the way, what the change order looks like out of the system, looks like this. And of course, I can communicate that out. So that's kind of you know, the change orders, and really the benefits there is it's seamlessly tying across everywhere. The status is ultimately the gatekeeper on when that data goes and updates things. And at the end of the day, you know, you get complete visibility on all of your change orders. So for example, if because we're talking about cost controls today, if I wanted to get visibility in all my subcontractors' change orders for a specific job, I can get that list organized by vendor. So here I've got 3, approved, open, review, dispute, and the total. So I can see them by vendor and for the job as a whole. And so we get complete visibility on that. Of course, all this stuff flows into accounts payable. And I know we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so I'm going to just hit a couple of really key points on here, really just from a management of information perspective. So, you know, when I enter a invoice against a subcontract, what ends up happening is I reference the subcontract number on the invoice. And when I go to enter that invoice and I key in that subcontract number, the first thing that happens, of course, is I get notified that, hey, this vendor kind of expires certificate of insurance. Also what happens, like I mentioned earlier, is it auto-populates what's remaining on that contract. Now this is where it's pretty neat. Of course, I override this on what the vendor actually billed me for that line item on the schedule of values. But from a cost control perspective, when I go to try to save this invoice, just like all the other areas of the product, we've got this set over subcontract and over PO warning. And what that's basically doing is protecting you from overpaying your commitments. And you have complete control over that. Now, I know earlier in the meeting, someone asked, I hadn't answered it yet, someone had asked about also making sure we don't go over budget as it relates to, I think they said, hold on, yeah, AP invoices. Same thing goes when something gets job costed in the system. One, I can make sure that this cost code that we're allocating the invoice against actually exists in my budget, and also we can make sure we're not going over budget. And that's important because if you get invoices from, say, Home Depot, something that has nothing to do with the committed cost, we still want to make sure that that invoice is not pushing us over budget, and that's what that cost control will do for us. Eventually, as we get those invoices in here and set the pay, let's see. As these invoices get in here and recorded, we eventually need to determine how we're going to pay these guys. I just want to kind of highlight a couple of things here because I mentioned it earlier. Here's where I could say I can put some controls on here. First off, do I want to exclude vendors with overdue certificates of insurance? Yes or no on that. I can default that, have that turned on. I can also, here's where I can say, hey, you know what? There's the whole pay. Exclude those guys too. And of course, I can pay, you know, by job, and or I can do it by job and by vendor, and so on and so forth. And we just set these invoices to be paid. But the point is, we've got some control here to exclude invoices for non-compliant vendors. We can also generate out documents when it's time to actually print their checks, such as lien waivers. Now, we've got people on the phone from many different states. The point I'd make here is, we do not have the legal language to your particular state. But that being said, we do have a full-blown form design tool in here, and it's very easy to modify this lien waiver to incorporate your legal language so that you can print them out of the system and not have to manually create them in Word. All of these things we just talked about produces a number of reports, starting with the job summary report. As I mentioned earlier, we've got our baseline budget organized by cost code and division, adding approved changes to that budget, both positives and negatives, giving us, a new budget. Cost to date, percent of complete remaining budget. We can have confidence in this now because of all the things we just went through. And we can get that information quickly. For those of you who like more detailed reporting, we can also look at that information a little differently, by the transaction level. So here, I'm looking at that same information, but here what I'm looking at is job, cost code, and transaction. So now I'm looking at the cost code at the micro level, right? So each individual cost entry. And it's, like I said earlier, fully auditable. Here's the transaction number. Here's the actual record number in the system. So again, fully auditable. CPAs love that. And for those of you who are subbing out work, a lot of times clients will ask, well, hey, how do I just simply, I guess since I'm looking at the word, audit my subcontractor's contract? We actually have a pre-built report in the system that lets you review a subcontractor's contract activity. So here I'm looking at the record residence for Perfection Windows. There's their schedule of values, gives me their base contract. It's showing me all of their approved change orders and adding that to their base. I can quickly see with confidence that there's no liabilities here, no open change orders. If there were, they would be listed there. And then lastly, I get all the invoice detail and all of that recap for me. So yeah, I can quickly and easily, and quite frankly, maybe send that to the sub. If they're disputing where they're at on a contract, I could just quickly email that to them. So the last thing I wanted to show is trying to tie all of this stuff together in dashboarding. So we actually have an executive level dashboard, and of course security controls who can see that. And basically what we do there is we pick little pieces of content based on what's relevant to your individual needs, and then that is being published up to me to review. So, I picked one that shows me my 5 most underbilled jobs. So, and we can calculate percent of complete as it relates to actual percent of complete, because we're able to have our costs, our fully integrated budget with changes, gives us our percent of completion, calculates that off our contract, which then tells me what I've earned, looks at what I've earned compared to what I billed, and now tells me that I'm over or under billed. We've got different versions of that report, by the way, but that's a simple version of that. I can see outstanding change requests. Say, look, these are older than 30 days. I need to hop on these, get them approved. I can see things like uncommitted budget. We talked about buyout earlier. What's my uncommitted budget? All that type of stuff. So I can look at it holistically and drill down from here, or I can look at specific reports. So that's really kind of, at least from a high-level perspective, some really neat things that you can leverage software to do to really help gain control over your project cost controls on your jobs. And likely a lot of the things we talked about today, if you're using a generic package, you just literally can't do those things. So hopefully those of you on the phone found some value in that. Also, I got a question, some general questions here I'll try and answer with the few minutes we have left. Someone asked if we have a service module for both 100 or 300. The answer to that is yes, we do. So it's down here. So we call that a dispatch board. So if you're issuing, work orders, sorry about that. Let me show my menu. If you're issuing work orders and working off a dispatch board, and for those of you that are real heavy into doing service work, we actually have an integration with a company that will let you do mobile work orders. So that's pretty cool. I think I answered the one on the how we do percent of complete. Just to add a little bit more to that, we can do what's called cost to complete in here, where I can take a job, bring in not only the budget, but the cost that we've incurred to date, and that tells us our percent of complete based on our accounting data. And then from there, we can come in and say, well, based on what I see versus what this is telling me, here's my actual percent of complete, which then tells me my cost to complete, my over and under, so on and so forth. So we can do that and feed that data into reports too. One other question. Boy, I get this question every time. That's pretty funny. Yeah. So can we issue a, so certificates of insurance, we actually have a form letter. It's kind of what was being asked. It's under vendor documents. And we can generate a form letter out of the system that you could email to your vendor, just putting them on notice that they're overdue. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate everybody's time today. If for some reason we did not address your question fully enough, or you have other questions, or you'd like to learn more, just please call us at 888-559-9540.